Although we're not saying that Windows is a bad operating system, I would.
Hello YouTube and welcome to Heathen Hacks. As some of you might know, I've started using Linux last year. And with it, of course, I have gained a lot of knowledge and insight that I didn't even know was possible when I was still using Windows. Have experienced quite a few rage quit moments accompanied by existential dread and, just like most people new to the OS, have pondered if it's even worth switching.
Disclaimer time.
This video is not aimed to encourage nor dissuade anyone from using Linux. What OS you pick is obviously up to you. This video's main objective is to share what I have personally experienced using Linux, what I did before switching, the things I've learned along the way, and the hardships that are entailed with using a different operating system that I'm not used to. In addition, for transparency, I've already used Linux before, but just for a janky HD PC where I made use of a laptop that has a broken monitor and keyboard. Nothing more. I installed Ubuntu on it way back 2017. Let's go! So, to start off, my actual Linux journey, the one where I used it exclusively and not just for an HD PC, began around April last year. And obviously, just like most things new to me, I started by learning and researching about it first. These are the following questions that I've asked myself before starting to use Linux. What can I expect? What distro should I use? Can I still use the proprietary applications that I use for work and hobbies on Linux? And if not, what are the alternatives? UI and user friendliness wise, are the alternatives good? Can I still play my Steam games? What about IQ? How can I control my fan speeds and monitor temperature? Can I still use my keyboard's features without it? What about AHK? What proprietary software can I live without? And lastly, would my hardware still be usable on Linux? Well, I actually have quite a few more, but these are the most important to me. Let's start with question 1. What can I expect? To help answer this question, I've watched a lot of videos attempting to answer them from the likes of Linus Tech Tips, thanks Anthony, Some Ordinary Gamers, Mental Outlaw, Tech Hut, Chris Titus Tech, The Linux Experiment, and a lot more. Of course, videos won't answer everything, so I have also read quite a few articles and lurked around forums here and there as well. From what I've learned, Linux isn't really that complicated to use if you're going to stick with the more mainstream ones. Bugs are unavoidable, especially on rolling release distros, but they're usually patched quickly. You can change distros easily if the one you're currently using is not to your liking, and thus without losing your settings. After learning what to expect, I did the same thing to answer, or at least help me answer question 2. What distro should I use? By having a plethora of choices, one could feel overwhelmed with all the distros available, and sure enough, I did felt that as well. However, because of the things I've learned from question 1, I knew how to at least narrow them down to pinpoint what distro I should use or try. And since I consider myself as a power user and want things to be always updated, I chose an Arch-based distro called Arco Linux together with Kwin as the window manager for KDE Plasma. To my knowledge, generally when picking a distro, you should consider a few things. Namely, stability. How frequent do you want your system to update? If you want to have the latest of everything, go with an Arch-based distro. Arch-based distros are rolling release distros, which means that updates to the kernel are released continuously or rolled out in small but frequent updates rather than in batches of versions and as soon as they're available. And if you want more stability, go with Debian-based, or at least, that's what the majority says. There are pros and cons to both choices, of course, so you have to choose wisely. Support. In the sense of if it has an active community and general support from the distro maintainer on Reddit, Discord, the distro's official forum, and of course, ease of installation. Being a literal noob, I chose the path of least resistance and chose a distro that has a GUI installer. After picking my distro of choice, I have downloaded an installer from the distro's official website and have installed it on a virtual machine. I use VirtualBox inside Windows first to have a general feel of things or to familiarize myself first on the basics of how it works and how to customize it. Questions 3 and 4. Can I still use the proprietary applications that I use for work and hobbies on Linux? And if not, what are the alternatives? UI and user friendliness wise, are the alternatives good? Luckily enough, all the proprietary software that I use for work have Linux alternatives. like LibreOffice for MS Office, GIMP for Photoshop, Inkscape for Illustrator, and the ones that I'm too lazy to mention. What's left now are the proprietary software that I use for my hobbies, like Adobe Audition, Premiere Pro, Lightroom, After Effects, and FL Studio. For Adobe Audition, Premiere Pro, and After Effects, I picked DaVinci Resolve as an alternative because even though it's a proprietary software, it has support for Linux, and it has a lot of powerful features even on the free version. I use it for recording audio and editing my videos at the same time. I also have Audacity as a backup audio recording software for times when Resolve is not functioning properly. And I have Kdenlive for quick video editing as well, but mostly just for making memes. Moreover, I use Blender for 3D stuff instead of DVR because I'm more used to it. Also, just by happenstance, I was already using Resolve even when I was still on Windows. So the transitioning process was not that hard for me. In place of Lightroom, I use Darktable now. I still use Lightroom inside a VM from time to time though because Darktable is still confusing for me. And for FL Studio, well, I just switch to my Windows OS which is installed on a separate SSD whenever I feel like using it because some FL Studio plugins do not work inside a VM. I have used Linux daily for about a month until I realized that I'm not relying on Windows or Microsoft applications that much anymore before I took the plunge. Like literally. I'll just turn on my PC, log in, launch the VM, and spend my whole day and night inside the VM. Okay, let's move on to question 5. Can I still play my Steam games? And to answer this question, first, I had to search and find out if the games I own are supported on ProtonDB. ProtonDB is an unofficial community website that collects and displays crowdsourced data describing the compatibility of a given title with Proton, on a rating scale from Bort to Platinum. Now, I only own games from Steam, so that's the only place that I needed to check. Well, except maybe for Minecraft, but Minecraft is already supported on Linux, and it's really easy to install by the way. Also, thanks to Steam's Proton compatibility tool and the devs behind Wine, all of my Steam games are compatible and supported on Linux. But, to be able to play the games properly, I have to install Linux on bare metal. And since I've already used Linux extensively for about a month inside a VM, the process of switching to it was quite seamless. Had quite a few headache-inducing problems because of Ubisoft's Uplay, which is called Ubisoft Connect now, where I would be able to install a Ubisoft game and won't be able to launch it. But luckily, I've managed to find a workaround. Turns out, the trick is to first install a Ubisoft game that didn't come from a bundle. So, I installed Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag first to install Uplay and updated it. After that, I installed the other Ubisoft game that I wanted to continue playing, launched it to download and update Uplay again, and then uninstalled AC4 Black Flag. Quite cumbersome indeed, but that's the workaround I've discovered. Question 6. What about iQ? How can I control my fan speeds, monitor temperature, and can I still use my keyboard's features without it? Obviously, iQ is not available on Linux, even though the software itself is using Qt, which is what KDE use. Well, it doesn't matter that much anyway because after a few days of searching, I have found 2 open source packages or applications that would be able to provide answers to my questions on both GitHub and GitLab. And they are called Kulero, it's called Cooler Control now, and CKBNex. Basically, Kulero or Cooler Control deals with the fan speed control, temperature monitoring, and a few basic RGB settings. And CKBNext deals with my Corsair K70 RGB Mark II's macros, hotkeys, and my keyboard's RGB settings. I don't use CKBNext anymore though because I'm using a different keyboard now. Question 7. Can I still use AHK? Unfortunately, the answer to this question is a resounding no. Because, although it is an open source software, it is built mainly for Windows. There are a few projects here and there that attempts to port AHK to Linux, but I didn't try them. No need to worry about it though, since everything that you can do on AutoHotkey can be done with Python. And if you want something that works like AutoHotkey but a little bit different and actually a bit more powerful, you can use AutoKey instead. AutoKey is a desktop automation utility for Linux and X11. It's a little GUI application that runs Python 3 scripts and does text expansion, especially focusing on macro and key press functionality. For example, you need to include something repeatedly on documents like your name and address. Instead of entering those manually, copying and pasting, or using hotkeys, you can just type your phrase like NMAD and AutoKey would handle entering the values for you. I use both
AutoKey
and my custom Python scripts for my work automations and macros actually. They're really handy to have. I'm also thinking of making a video about it soon, so stay tuned for that. Question 8. What proprietary software can I live without? The answer to this question is solely up to you. In my case, the majority of the proprietary software that I use have good or comparable open source Linux alternatives. Well, except maybe for Lightroom and FL Studio, but I don't use them that often anyway, and I can just log into my Windows OS whenever I desperately need them. And finally, question 9. Would my hardware still be usable on Linux? According to what I've read, this one depends on the distro that you're going to choose, since some distros are excellent at supporting various mainstream hardware, old and new, but some distros are not that good. Personally, I chose Arch Linux because they have an active user base on Discord. It's Arch-based, which means that it is on the bleeding edge, has vast documentation, usable package libraries, and the maintainer, Sir Eric, is also active on YouTube. It has a GUI installer just like most Arch-based distros, and it has a ton of bash aliases for ease of use or quality of life improvements. On the other hand, I chose KDE Plasma as my desktop environment because of all the customizations that I can do with it, and because of the active and generally nice people on their subreddit. I can count how many times I've asked them for help on things that I'm confused about, and they always give me an answer. Okay, now that we have answered all the questions, let's talk about some of my experiences using Linux. Coming from someone that has used Microsoft Windows as an operating system for more or less than 2 decades now, I did have had some difficulties during my first week inside the VM. The difficulties I have encountered were not related to installation or the usage though, but more on the terminologies like how the task manager on KDE is
different
on Windows, and the Windows key is called meta or super.
also.
What is root? What is slash? What is X11? What is Wayland? Are they different? Are they the same? What should I use between the two? Besides the terminologies that I had to get used to, I also had some trouble with theming. I mean, on Windows, as far as I know, there's not a lot of customizations available besides dark mode, except maybe the one that can change your taskbar and maybe rain meter and wallpaper engine, and that's all that I know of. On Linux though, specifically on KDE,
Yeah, boy.
as the meme goes, your settings have their own settings. It took me about a week just to finish all my customizations to make it look like how I wanted it to. And of course, choosing Linux alternatives to use did take quite a while as well, because although there are a lot of available alternative software that pretty much could do the same thing as their Microsoft Windows counterparts, a lot of them have UI that are not to my liking. Like on Windows, I use iTunes as my main music player. It took me like a week or two just to find a good alternative that has the UI that I like. And sure, I could have just used Cider, but I don't have an Apple device and I don't use my Apple ID anymore. Setting up Bluetooth was really easy too. In fact, I didn't even set it up after installation. It's just there and ready to go.
The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
What I had a problem with was displaying my device's battery levels. That ordeal took me more than a week to fix, but after that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. I really like the installation part as well, because instead of just installing the OS, there are a lot of options that you can install together with it, like browsers, media players, IDEs, editing programs, and a lot more, so that everything is ready for you after you install your OS. No annoying advertisements, no annoying notifications about signing up or logging into an account as well, compared to what Microsoft does, and it's up to you if you want to update or not. On the driver's side, I only had to install the ones from my GPU because it's proprietary and came from Nvidia, but all is good, it's included on the OS installation process. Going back to the settings and customization stuff, it's really easy to restore everything when a fuck-up happens. Well, if you have a backup of course, because all your settings on all the applications that you use are saved on the home folder. The applications that you use are not allowed to touch that directory without your permission, so everything is secured and stays just how you like it. All you need to do after a fresh installation is basically just copy and paste your backed up home directory and delete the new one, and you're usually good to go after reinstalling the applications that you use. No need to set up everything again. No need to scour the web for an installer as well if you want to install something, because if they're not on your chosen desktop manager's app store like KDE's Discover, you can find them on either the AUR or GitHub. Everything that you want to use is just there for you to download and install. I mean, provided that Linux is supported by the program that you want to use, that is. I also really like the actually functioning search feature on KDE called KRunner, or is it Runner? There are also a lot of things that I wanted to include on this video, but unfortunately, I think it would make the video too long. So, yeah.
Thank you for chatting with me. This has been your last brain cell speaking.